Today we're going to be talking about values in action, moving from mission statements to meaningful change. And I've known Bronwyn Clee on LinkedIn for a number of years. She's a workplace development consultant, executive coach and facilitator at the Institute of Hope. She is known for facilitating courageous conversations and strengthening emotionally fit leaders and communities, which is just incredible. So welcome, Bronwyn. So excited.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And thank you for being my technical guinea pig on this. Last time we did live for World Values Day, there was a whole different system. LinkedIn have completely changed it all. And so we now sort of use Zoom to do it rather than third-party tools. So thanks to everyone's patience on that. So Bronwyn, I want to start by asking you, can you tell me about the types of organisations you typically work with and the kind of work that you do with them?
Sure. And I guess, look, before I want to launch into this, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm sitting on beautiful Larrakia lands. It's just the most extraordinary time of the year here in the dry season in the top end of Australia. So I've had the privilege of living, loving, laughing, playing, crying, working, and showing up on these beautiful Larrakia lands for 26 years. So I'd just like to pay my respects there to elders past, present and emerging.
And I should pay my respects to elders on Gumbaynggirr country where I am as well. And it's for our international viewers. It's a very wonderful tradition we have in Australia. If you've never heard the acknowledgement of the land that you're on before, I think it's really acknowledging our Indigenous elders. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. My pleasure. It's a privilege for me.
Mm-hmm. And it's an important values-based practice, I think, here in Australia.
It is. So I guess the typical agencies, businesses that I work with historically really have been government departments. I've worked with private enterprise, I've worked with non-government agencies, but essentially the demand for the kind of work I do is directly related to helping people resolve workplace conflict and tension, which I love. Like I'm one of those weirdos who I really I get such a thrill out of being able to help facilitate in that space. It's not that I love conflict. I love being able to be a person who can come in and help facilitate the change that's required in safe, fun, effective ways. So I've done extraordinary work with the education department in a number of their internal departments over the years. But I do have to say I'm not for everyone, and I'm very, very mindful about that. And I do go where others might fear to go, and that can be very confronting for some people. So I own that, and I'm always really clear in early negotiations around any pieces of work. I generally try to talk people out of working with me because I'm not for the faint-hearted, and I do have very high expectations that people will be able to do the work that's required to get the change that they're after. If I had a magic wand, I'd love to sprinkle fairy dust everywhere, but it's just not that straightforward.
No, that's I think that's a beautiful acknowledgement, because I don't think any of us are for everyone. It's really important. So what are the common reasons that organisations reach out to you for support? And is it typically individuals or is it teams?
Well, when I think back over the last 20 years particularly, it really has varied. It will usually be initiated by a manager or like a department manager or a human resources manager who will pick up the phone and say, someone told me about you. Can you please come and help us fix this mess? And that will usually be in relation to individuals who aren't able to interact very well with each other. But it's rarely because the conflict has been directly named, which I always find quite fascinating. So can I share an example?
Please do. I'd love you to.
So I had this middle manager within a government agency ring me years ago to say, someone told me that I should ring you because you can help sort my people out. And I burst out laughing. I'm like, I don't have a magic wand. And she said, we've just got all of this tension and I don't know what to do with it. I'm like, oh, okay. I said, I don't do quick fixes. So I can't just come in. I'm not prepared to come in and do like a 3-hour workshop and then off you go and everything's going to be fine, because it won't be. And it taken a year for this manager to contact me because she had tried everything she could to manage the conflict, right? So I'm like, if it's taken a year for you to get this far to contact me, I can't promise a quick turnaround on this. So if you're prepared to look at this from a capacity building approach, we can put a number of things in place. She's like, yeah, great, okay. So I devised these workshops, right, to work with the team to start to safely address what's actually happening. And we got to the second workshop. The first introductory workshop was around emotional fitness, and people were relatively engaged with it. Got to the second workshop, and I could feel, like I read people, and I could feel this tension in the room. So rather than proceed with the outline that I had in front of me, I said to them, I think there were about 12 in the team, I went, can I just call half time here? Like, I don't think we can proceed with what we thought we were going to do today. And I could feel the shock. People were like, why? I said, there's this great big elephant in the room. Like, I can feel it. What the hell is going on here? And they were like, And this incredibly courageous person said, I can tell you exactly what's going on. And I said, great, because if we can name it, we're going to be able to address it easier. She said, we've got one member of this team who's a smoker, and that member takes 10-minute breaks 4 times a day to go and have a smoke and still has a lunch break. And she said, I've amortized those 4 smoke breaks every day. That's an hour every day. So 5 hours a week, this person is not doing their job. We're all picking up that person's work. It was extraordinary. So we started to really get into what the issue was. The smoker actually identified themselves and said, actually, that's me you're talking about. I had no idea that everyone was so upset about this. And the person who raised it said, what did you think was going to happen with the work that you weren't doing? Because someone had to do it. So this conflict that had been brewing was directly attached to a values clash around injustice. People were feeling it was so unfair that this smoker got to go and have her smoke and have her breaks and still get paid, full pay. So we were then able to do some of that deeper work around where there's values clashes, how we manage them, where there's values violations, what we do about them, but then how we can circle back to really getting clear about what are the core values within the team, so people could feel reconnected as a team rather than this, because there was a real us and them. It was so evident. So it was an extraordinary piece of work. We had a 12-month project with that team, and the results were absolutely astonishing.
And I would imagine that is such a common, that issue particularly probably is a common, but there are so many issues similar to that in teams, I'm sure, across the world that until it's addressed, and it can just be a perception. It's right. A really, really helpful story.
Well, naming it was just a game changer, and it wasn't about shaming, blaming the person. It was about the identification that this is problematic and it's affecting all of us. So it wasn't.
And also you saying there's an elephant in this room is also an invitation.
Totally.
Perhaps people haven't been asked before. No, that's really good. That's a really helpful example. Thank you. What, in your experience, what steps can organisations take to become more trauma-informed in practices and in culture?
I have some, so I'm therapeutically trained, and I have some real challenges around the language trauma-informed now when it comes to workforce development. Any agency, any private practice, any individual can be trauma informed. I could send you right now a stack of information in regards to having a trauma-informed lens, and you could say you are trauma-informed because you've received the information. And then what? So unless agencies, departments, private practice, non-government, government, whatever, across the board, unless there's a willingness, a preparedness to be trauma responsive and trauma transformative, in the therapeutic field now, for me, trauma informed it's just about gathering information. So the willingness for agencies, it's actually the willingness for individuals to lead from a trauma responsive perspective. If we could get people into that space, let alone being trauma transformative. So trauma responsive really for me is more about having a sense of kindness, compassion, respect, and curiosity. Have you ever been in an experience where you've seen someone or you've heard someone say they just went from 0 to 100? Like that was just so out of character, that behaviour that I just saw. In that kind of a situation, for someone to be trauma informed, they could sit and observe from a position of kindness and compassion. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to support the person who has just had this experience, what in some worlds we might call it flipping our lid. My 10-year-old grandson, he says he has meltdowns. He just loses it. That's his language. So simply observing someone in that kind of a space, particularly in a workplace, it's not enough. Trying to disrupt, having a sense of just calm down, worst thing you can do, like pouring oil onto a fire. Because in that situation, if the person felt like they could calm down, they would. No one wants to lose their sense of dignity at work, particularly. So a trauma responsive approach would be more around being able to observe and have a sense of what might be appropriate, what might be helpful for that person in that instance. So direct eye contact can be really confronting, conflicting. Coming beside someone, simply standing beside someone if you feel safe enough, and quietly saying, is there anything I can do to support you right now? That's been one of the most powerful statements I've had offered to me and I've offered to others in those moments where we feel like our nervous system's just not coping. Because that's literally what happens when we go from 0 to 100.
That's interesting. No, this is really interesting, the shift from trauma-informed to trauma-responsive.
It's huge.
It is, because a trauma-informed is such a phrase or, a word combination we have grown to be used to. But no, I really, really love that perspective. Thank you.
You know what bothers me the most about, and I will stop in a minute, but what really bothers me, and it pushes my internal therapeutic buttons, is it's easy to be trauma-informed. Like the access to information we have now, it is at the tip of our fingers. Anyone can be trauma informed. It's not enough. I'll stop now.
No, that's an excellent point to make. I think people will really appreciate that perspective.
Thank you.
So I know in your work, values are such a big part of the work in organisations, but I wanted to ask you about the misalignment between an individual's values and the values of the organisation they work for. Because, I've interviewed people for the last couple of years for World Values Day, and this is a really big thing, and you read about it a lot in, business press, is, about working for a company that you feel aligned to. So what are the kind of consequences when you don't have that alignment?
So interesting thing again. So I want to respectfully and professionally just challenge the language, because there's not always a consequence. There's always an effect. So an effect of being in an organisation where there's not enough values alignment, for me, I would give the examples of I actually physically feel uncomfortable in an environment where there is a high proportion of values misalignment. I fundamentally don't feel safe. So the effect of that on me is I might doubt myself, I might need constant reassurance, I might start to actually even have doubts about whether the people around me are saying what they mean. Like the effects are extraordinary. Consequences, maybe there might be a consequence of me starting to take a lot of sick leave, but the effects far outweigh the consequences. And I think the other extraordinary thing in this space is we live in a world now, I think it was in the 80s, where the values propositions became the whole focus of within the business world. So know your values, know your vision, know your mission, know your goals, put them all around the boardroom, have them in the code of conduct. The bit for me that's always missing, and it's part of what I would call mop-up work that I do, is in actually, before you're even employing someone, to get a sense of what the prospective employees' values are and where there are enough values alignment with the company values. That conversation doesn't take place. Most people aren't really aware of what like most people that I work with, to say to them, what are your top 4 values? Like 3 to 5 core values. It's not something that we're actually taught to be explicit about. So implicitly we know them. So when it comes to that values misalignment, what can end up happening is if I'm in a work environment where there's not enough values alignment and I'm not aware of what's actually happening, I start to doubt myself. I start to think it's all about me. I start to think everyone else is doing what they're doing and they're getting along just fine. It's me that's the weirdo. I don't fit. Probably true, but the real issue to hand is in the lack of education about values alignment. So if the core values of a company are respect, integrity, honesty, and compassion, and I see from top management down a lack of respect, a lack of compassion, people stepping out of integrity, that I will experience the misalignment. Like this all happens in ways that we're not always conscious of, but it happens. So if I park that for a minute and just reference some of the research, I think it was out of Canada, at the heart of all, Massachusetts, at the heart of all conflict is injustice. Justice is a value. So from my perspective, I'm digging a bit deeper in that research and going, you know what, at the heart of all injustice is a values clash and sometimes a values violation.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Make sense?
It does. It really makes sense. And I think there's a whole tangent we could go on in terms of organisational values, as to say these values, and nobody actually even understanding what that means it becomes a very marketing department thing. Oh, here are our values, but how do you actually instill those values within an organisation? And management, yeah.
Sorry, but I was going to say the bigger question for me is, so yes, how are those values enacted? What do they look like on a daily basis? But the bigger question for me is, what's the process when those values are not being upheld? Where do we have processes in place to say that was out of integrity, or that was unfair, that was disrespectful, and then where are the effects, where are the consequences within the workplace around that?
Can you give me an example of work you've done and what, obviously not saying anything that, that's confidential, but where you've actually gone in and done that with an organisation or a team, and what the outcomes were?
So it's an interesting space to be in, because there's not a lot of the agencies that do this really well do it that well that they don't pull people like me in. The agencies that don't do it very well are at the very beginning of that process. So it's like baby steps. So the starting point is working through a model called the language of safety. That's my first and foremost foundational tool. The language of safety is about having quality, clarity, shared meaning, and ownership in all of our communications, internal, external, verbal, non-verbal. So starting from there, I then go through a values mapping process. And when I'm working with a team, I'll get the team to work up. I've got these beautiful St. Luke's cards, team values cards. We'll work up a process to be able to identify what are the values. Like people individually choose a card to go, this really matters to me. And then we'll put all of those cards together and then start to really drill down into. So if honesty and truth have both been chosen as cards, we'll then make some choices about, they're really close cousins, right? They sit closely together. What do they matter? What do they mean, and what matters most? And then have those two cards as one, so to speak. So the process then is really about coming up with 3 to 5 core values for the team to put their hand on their heart. I just did this 6 weeks ago in Adelaide. Like this, I do this regularly. Hand on heart, these are the values that matter to our team. There's never been a misalignment with the core values of the organisation when the team have identified their core values. So the next part of the process then is to say, if these are the values that matter most to us, what do they look like? So people are really clear about what they look like, what they sound like, what they feel like, those values. And people love that. They're like, oh, this is really yum. And I'm like, right, now let's get them down into the dirt. And what happens when those values are not being enacted? And that's when people kind of freeze. It's like, ah. And to me, it's circling back to the language of safety. If we're prepared to have quality conversations where we can take ownership and be clear about what it is that we've done and really own our own stuff, we're more likely to get much better outcomes. So it's a process, and it's not a process where I've worked with agencies long enough where they've been prepared to go full tilt.
Well, at least some agencies are doing it themselves. But
Yeah, totally. And the willingness is there. People, in my worldview, most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to go to work, no matter where they work. They want to be able to go to work, do their work, feel safe at work, leave work at work and go home.
yeah, it should be a basic thing for us all, shouldn't it?
You'd think.
Bronwyn, I'd love to ask you about some of your values, because you do strike me as a very values-driven person. Can you think of maybe one core value you could share with us? Where did it come from, and how do you actively practice it in work and life?
I've been thinking about this, and I can feel myself getting a little bit teary already.
That's okay. You've safe space here.
Yeah. I think there's two that really come to mind, but kindness is the first one. And that's come directly from my mother. So Mum is, she's 86, just turned 86 and has dementia. She's lived an extraordinary life where she's raised 8 children, I think 22 grandchildren and 36 great-grandchildren that she's had a close connection. And to line all of her children up, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to say to any of them, what's the most important thing you know of your mum or man? Kind. She's so kind. She's kind and fun. Fun is her second core value, I would say. And that kindness really has come through living through some really complex life challenges, but her commitment to kindness has never wavered. Even when I've seen her absolutely devastated by someone's poor choices, she has still dug deep into kindness to the point where sometimes I thought, what the hell, woman? She's just been committed to this. You walk a mile in someone else's shoes before you start making judgments, Bron. And as a little girl hearing that, I used to think, oh my God. But now I get it. And kindness for her, it wasn't just about the other person, it was also about herself. Because she would say, if I can extend someone else a kindness when they feel like they're not worthy of it, who knows who might do that for me one day. So that pay it forward kind of thinking. And that I can certainly relate to moments in my life where I have felt like I didn't want to be kind to someone for some stuff that had happened. But I could hear her words and I could feel Mother's intent of kindness isn't just for the other person, it's for us as well. So that's a really big one for me. And integrity. integrity is, I can remember thinking I need to get that as a tattoo because it's the one thing that I can really like anchor into. I am not for sale.
Two great values.
Yeah.
And I just, to kind of, I guess, finish off, can you tell me about a time in your life when you faced a challenge in staying true to your values? And how did you navigate that situation?
I can actually. I directly remember, wow, this was a big one. I was working in child protection in residential care. Um, oh gosh, over 20 years ago. And I witnessed some absolutely appalling behaviour by the team leader. And I addressed it, thinking this will stop. This, like I'm a residential child protection worker. He's the team lead. This behaviour needs to be addressed, and then it'll stop. And he laughed at me. And he said, as soon as you actually realise that only hurt people work with hurt people, you'll be able to get on with your job. And Anna, I remember leaving that shift thinking, number one, my priority was for the students that I was supporting. I was really concerned for them. But number two, I'm thinking, I didn't even pay attention to anything that I said. So I had in some respects, when I look back now, the invitation was there for me to step out of my integrity and just take what the team lead said and just put my head down and ignore it. Bronwyn Clee's never going to do that, by the way. So I reported it up the chain as far as I possibly could. It was a government agency, right? And I got called in to meet with the assistant director of the agency, and I was asked to, because I had lodged a formal complaint by that stage, and I was asked to seriously consider recanting what I had written. And I remember just sitting there looking at this man thinking, like, I didn't finish school, and I could have been one of those kids in juvenile care. But I remember sitting there thinking, I might not know a lot, but there is no way I am backing down on this one, mate. And I remember folding my arms and looking at the guy, and I said to him, I think you're a bit confused. And he said, in what way? I said, I think you think I'm someone who gives a shit. And he said, what do you mean? That doesn't sound very respectful. I said, you're asking me to rewrite what I know to be the truth. And in my world, that's a lie. And he looked at me and he said, if you ever want to work in the Northern Territory again, you will seriously reconsider what you have written. And my heart's racing now just even remembering that. Such a long time since I thought about it. But I remember standing up there and looking at this man saying to him, this is not the end of this. This is not finished. I am not recanting. I am not withdrawing my complaint. He said, you no longer have a job. I said, I figured that. I thought that was for sure on the cards, right? So over the preceding couple of months, I had death threats. I had a threat. One of my children answered my phone, and a threat was made to my son. It was like, when I think back on it, it was absolutely atrocious behaviour, right? But at no point in time did I ever consider recanting, because I thought, what's happening here is wrong. So that whole department, that team, was, because there was a ministerial inquiry, I stood down, and things did get harder for me in that child protection area. I was actually studying at the time, and I came across this restorative justice movement, and for me it was like a missing bit that wasn't happening within this child protection agency that I was employed through. Fast forward 12 months after that appalling situation, I was the lead for the Northern Territory to bring the first restorative justice program into a school in the Territory. And I can remember thinking, yeah, I'm not for sale, and I will not be bribed. I will not be coerced into stepping out of my integrity.
And that awful experience had a positive change.
It did.
sort of change?
It did. It did. Yeah, I honestly had not thought about that for such a long time. But that question, it was just like, oh, there it is.
Mm.
The invitation to step out of integrity. I think that there's so many of them.
Yes, I think we are all in many ways invited to step out of the values
Right.
on a regular basis of our own values, and it's making the decisions to stick with them that I think, yeah, that's where the hard work is.
I think having a preparedness to reflect and consider, and for me, it's the reflection back to why these values are so important to me, and why do they matter so much. They matter so much to me because I sleep great at night. Like, I love being able to go to bed thinking I've done the best I can to help make the world a better place today, no matter how small it was. But I did the best I could, and that's what keeps me really glued to my core values.
Yep, no, that's great. That's really good, and thank you for sharing that story. We're probably running out of time, Bronwyn, but I just, my last question really is just about how can people find out more about your work? Where can they find you? And perhaps get some more information with regards to the work that you do.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So on LinkedIn, my name, Bronwyn Clee, easy to find. I believe I'm the only Bronwyn Clee in the world.
That's exciting.
I know, right?
And I will pop some links below.
Yeah, thank you.
Video, so you can find it a bit more easily too.
And my websites, the main one is the instituteofhope.com.au. So I have yeah, it is, and there's a story to it for another day. But there's a consortium of change makers on there where we do a whole host of different work. But really, I think our core message really is we want to do what we can to help make the world a better place.
Well, thank you so much, Bronwyn.
Oh, thank you.
If you're watching a replay and you've got a question, please direct it Bronwyn's way or in the comments below, and we'll try and get back to you. But, thank you again. This has really been a beautiful conversation, Bronwyn, and thank you for being so open and sharing.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks again. We'll see you on another live soon.